Have you ever noticed that some days just feel easier? Everything seems to flow, you remember things more easily, you stay focused, and getting through the day doesn't feel like such hard work. Then there are the other days, where nothing has really gone wrong, but your brain feels about one step behind. You're distracted, forgetful, and somehow even the simplest tasks take on way more effort than they should. So what changed? What if the difference isn't motivation or willpower at all? What if it's something your brain depends on every single day, but you hardly ever notice? Today we're talking about why some days feel so much easier than others, and what neuroscience tells us about the surprising power of routines and temporal organization. If you want to hear more, please stay tuned. Hi, I'm Becky from Music is Academic, and I work with teachers, schools, families, and organizations to turn brain science into practical tools that support learning, attention, and regulation. I've personally spent years trying to figure out why some days feel so much easier than others. I didn't suddenly become more organized overnight, yet every once in a while, everything just seems to fall into place. I move from one task to the next without much effort, I stay focused, and at the end of the day, I feel so good because I feel like I've actually accomplished something. But then there are the days when I can't seem to get out of my own way. I'm distracted by every little thing. I can't seem to focus on the simplest of projects. I'm restless and just generally unsettled. For a long time, I assumed those difficult days were simply part of being busy. Maybe I hadn't slept well, or I was just extra stressed, or maybe I just needed another cup of coffee. And certainly those things can make a difference. However, I've realized there may be something else happening beneath the surface. Our brains are constantly trying to make sense of what's happening around us, but they're also trying to make sense of when things happen. They're looking for patterns, sequences, and the order of events, because knowing what usually comes next makes life easier to navigate. When those patterns are working in our favor, the day feels smoother than we expected. But when they disappear, even ordinary tasks can seem surprisingly difficult. That doesn't mean we need to schedule every minute of our lives or live by a color-coded calendar. In fact, that's not what this is about at all. It's about understanding that the brain functions best when it has a few reliable landmarks throughout the day. Predictable moments that help it organize time, reduce uncertainty, and spend less energy figuring out what comes next. Once you begin looking at your day through that lens, you start to notice something fascinating. Those good days may not be lucky at all. So what exactly is the brain doing? One of the biggest discoveries in neuroscience over the past couple of decades is that the brain isn't simply reacting to the world around us. It's constantly making predictions. Long before you consciously realize what's even happening, your brain is already using past experience to anticipate what is most likely to happen next. Think about driving home from work. Have you ever pulled into your driveway and realized you don't really remember the last few miles of the trip? You weren't asleep, and you certainly weren't driving carelessly. Your brain had simply become so familiar with the sequence of events that it was able to predict much of what came next. That predictability made the task require much less mental effort. The same thing happens throughout our day. We don't have to stop and think about every single step involved with making coffee or brushing our teeth or getting ready for work because those patterns have become familiar to us over time. Our brains have learned the sequence, and that frees our attention for other things that are more important. The opposite is true as well. When the day becomes unpredictable, the brain has to work much, much harder. Suddenly, we're making decisions, switching our attention more often, and constantly trying to figure out what's coming next. Even if we're doing the exact same amount of work, it feels more exhausting because the brain is spending more energy organizing the day instead of simply moving through it. This is one of the reasons that I prefer to think about temporal organization instead of simply talking about routines. A routine is something we do. Temporal organization is what the brain experiences. It's the way our day unfolds through time, with enough predictability that the brain can anticipate what's coming without having to solve a new puzzle every 5 minutes. When we understand that difference, we begin to realize that an easier day isn't usually about having fewer things to do. More often, it's about giving the brain enough structure to stop worrying about what's next and start focusing on what matters now. Once you start thinking about temporal organization, you'll begin to see it everywhere. Have you ever noticed how the first day back after a vacation can feel strangely exhausting? It's not because you're working harder. In fact, sometimes you have less work to do than before you left. But for a few days, everything just feels a bit off. Your normal routine has changed, your schedule has shifted, and your brain is busy rebuilding the patterns it had become so comfortable with. The same thing happens when you move to a new house or start a new job, or maybe even lose an hour of sleep when the clocks change in the spring. Suddenly, we're thinking about things that normally happen almost automatically. Where did I park? What time does this meeting start? Which way do I normally drive? None of those questions are difficult on their own, but together they add up to a surprising amount of mental work. Children experience this too, although it looks very different. A child who has been flexible and cooperative all week may suddenly melt down after a holiday, or the first week after summer break, or even a day just filled with unexpected activities. Adults might describe feeling scattered or overwhelmed. Children often communicate the very same experience, only through their behavior. That doesn't mean we should avoid vacations, spontaneous adventures, or special occasions. Those are some of life's greatest joys. What it does suggest is that our brains appreciate having a few familiar landmarks to return to. They don't need every minute planned, but they do benefit from enough predictability to regain their footing when life becomes busy or unexpected. Once you recognize that, those difficult days begin to make a little more sense. They're often not a sign that something is wrong with us. Instead, they may simply be a sign that our brains are working overtime to reorganize time itself. So if the brain is constantly trying to organize time, what can we actually do with that information? The good news is that helping the brain doesn't require a perfectly planned schedule or a calendar that looks like it belongs to a project manager. In fact, some of the most effective forms of temporal organization are surprisingly simple. I like to think of them as anchors. They're predictable moments that give shape to the day, even when everything in between is a little messy. For some people, that might be taking the dog for a walk before work, or eating lunch at roughly the same time every day, or sitting down with a cup of tea every evening before starting the next task. Those moments may not seem particularly important, but they quietly tell the brain, this is where we are in the day, and this is usually what comes next. The same idea can make a remarkable difference for children. A consistent bedtime story, a familiar song before cleaning up, or taking a few minutes to talk about the day during dinner. All these things become temporal anchors that help children to anticipate what's coming next. The goal isn't to eliminate surprises or create rigid schedules. The goal is simply to give the brain enough predictable landmarks or anchors that it doesn't have to keep reinventing the day. One of the things that I find fascinating is that these anchors don't have to be complicated, and they don't even have to happen at exactly the same time every day. The brain is often more interested in the sequence than in the clock. If breakfast is usually followed by getting dressed, and getting dressed is usually followed by leaving the house, that predictable order helps the brain build expectations, even if the actual clock times vary from one day to the next. When we begin thinking this way, routines stop feeling like rules and start becoming tools. They're not about controlling every minute of the day. They're about giving the brain a dependable framework so that it can spend less energy figuring out where it is in time and more energy paying attention, solving problems, learning, and enjoying life. So let's go back to the question that we started with. Why do some days feel so much easier than others? Sometimes the answer really is that we slept better or had less stress or simply got lucky. But many times, the difference is much simpler than we realize. Our brains are constantly trying to organize time, and when the day provides enough predictable structure, life simply feels easier to navigate. That doesn't mean every day has to look the same. Life is wonderfully unpredictable, and I certainly wouldn't want to plan every minute of it for myself. But I have learned that when I have a few reliable anchors throughout my day, I spend less time feeling scattered and more time focusing on the things that really do matter. The same principle applies whether you're organizing your own workday, helping a child transition through the day, supporting an aging parent, or simply trying to make life feel a little less overwhelming. Our brains are remarkable prediction machines, and they work best when they have enough temporal organization to know where they are and where they're headed next. To help you get started, I've put together a free PDF called Creating Temporal Anchors, 5 Simple Ways to Help Your Brain Have an Easier Day. It's a quick guide with some practical ideas you can begin using immediately, whether you're thinking about yourself, your family, your work environment, or your classroom. You'll find the link in the description below. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have a daily habit or routine that helps your whole day run more smoothly? Have you noticed that vacations, holidays, or even small changes in your schedule leave you feeling a little out of sync? And if you could create just one new temporal anchor this week, what would it be? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing from you. If you've enjoyed today's video, I'd be so grateful if you'd give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone who always says, "I don't know why today feels so hard." It may be that their brain is simply looking for a little more organization and time. As always, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me today, and I'll see you next time.